here's a question that should keep you up at night. What happens to a constitution that everyone claims to worship but fewer people actually believe in it? Because that's where we are. The official story says that the system is strained but stable, that the checks and balances still work, that the founders built a machine so perfect that it just needs occasional oil and a few amendments every half century or so. We're told the Constitution is sacred, timeless, almost mystical, like it was carved into stone tablets by Madison up on Mount Federalist. And if things feel chaotic, if politics feels like a cage match refereed by blindfolded lawyers, that's just politics being politics. Nothing to see here, move along. That's the story. And it's also complete bullshit. Look around. Trust in Congress is scraping the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Presidents increasingly rule by executive order. Courts decide policy questions that the legislature is too paralyzed to touch. States and the federal government treat each other like divorced parents arguing in a grocery store parking lot. That's not a healthy republic. That's institutional decay, wearing a powdered wig. And here's the uncomfortable truth. A constitution doesn't die when it's repealed. It dies when people stop believing that it works. When citizens start seeing the government as illegitimate, not just wrong, but rigged, that's when the cracks turn into earthquakes. Civil unrest doesn't come out of nowhere. Political violence doesn't appear in a vacuum. They're symptoms of a system that the people no longer trust to solve problems peacefully. The founders understood that. That's why they replaced the Articles of Confederation instead of duct taping them forever. They weren't preservationists. They were reformers with ink-stained hands and a deadline. But today, we treat the 1787 Constitution like a vintage car locked in a museum. We polish it, we argue about it, we pose next to it for campaign photos. But heaven forbid we upgrade the engine. Think about it. We have lifetime judicial appointments in an era when people routinely live to their 80s and 90s. We have election systems designed for horseback messengers trying to govern a nation of 330 million people with nuclear weapons and social media. We have congressional districts drawn with the artistic integrity of a 2-year-old with a spilled bowl of spaghetti. And we call this stability? That's not stability, that's inertia with a flag pin. We're running a 21st century country on an 18th century operating system and wondering why it still keeps crashing. Now let me be clear, this idea of a constitutional rewrite isn't about hating the founding fathers. It's about honoring their method instead of embalming their product. A constitutional convention isn't radical, it's, well, constitutional. Real reform could mean term limits that prevent government service from turning into a retirement plan. Judicial reform that ends lifetime appointments and restores accountability. Clearer ethics in government so that public office stops looking like a stock trading side hustle. Modernized checks and balances that recognize the realities of executive power, digital surveillance, and the speed of modern crises. That's not tearing the system down. That's structural maintenance on the load-bearing beams of the republic. Liberty doesn't survive on nostalgia, it survives on adaptation. So let's go back to the question. What happens to a constitution that people stop believing in? History gives us the answer. Not reform, not debate, not orderly transition. You get riots, you get demagogues, you get people deciding that rules don't matter because the system never played fair anyway. When peaceful reform feels impossible, people start experimenting with the alternatives, and those alternatives are never gentle. Here's the irony. The people who seem to shout the loudest about defending the founders' legacy are often the ones most determined to freeze that work in amber. But the founders didn't freeze anything. They replaced a broken system with a better one. That was their legacy. So here's the real question. Are we brave enough to do what the founders actually did, or are we only brave enough to quote them? If you think that the Constitution should evolve into a true 21st century Constitution with real checks and balances, real ethics in government, and a truly nonpartisan effort to restore legitimacy, say so. Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who still thinks that reform is possible, because the cost of action is debate, but the cost of inaction is collapse.